what we're talking about is the emissions trading scheme and the impact on Australia. Now, let's go and have a look at the... So this is part 3 of the series. So before we were looking at the Climate Change Authority, what they need to do on the international guidelines, and how they're going to set the target, which will come in February. The review of the legislation under the emissions trading scheme. So why do we end up doing this emissions trading scheme? So Australia is involved in the United Nations framework for climate change. Now this has been going for over 20 years, so this is part of our commitment in reducing our emissions 5% 2000 levels, and also by 20% by 2020. So by doing this, the only way we could do that was to put the carbon tax in initially to hit the for the top 800. There's 862 companies on the NGR, or the National Greenhouse, NGERS, on the National Greenhouse scheme, or underneath the legislation. So out of that 862, let's call them sheep in the paddock, there was only going to be 330 companies affected by this. Now this, where this comes in, is under the 25,000 kilotons. Now what you'll probably find is when they do the review and they're looking at, okay, we've put in our ETS and we're only getting X amount of dollars from the ETS, from the 25,000 kiloton, the Climate Change Authority will put in a recommendation to reduce that from 25,000 to say 12,000 tonne, which will not only include the top 330 companies that are under the scheme now, it'll catch the other 500 companies plus another 1,000. So then that way, instead of the top 300 companies getting hit with the in the sheep pen, I suppose, that's going to catch everyone else in the sheep pen. So that another 862 companies plus another 1,000. So that's one thing we'll need to keep an eye on. So then how do we do this to reduce our emissions, or how do we identify our impact? Okay, so the way this works out on what they call the NGRS system, which is based on the international guidelines of ISO 14064 and ISO 14040. So this is what they call the life cycle analysis of the impact of company operations, which is just to help streamline business efficiency. Okay, so there's scopes that are broken into 3 areas. Scope 1 is the direct result of activity of the business. Scope 2 is this is where your electricity and heating and cooling comes in. Now Scope 3, this is your supply chain, also all your suppliers going up and down your supply chain. So this is the biggest impact to people's businesses. So at the moment now, Scope 1 and 2 are under the emissions trading scheme. Now the global 500 companies are putting in Scope 1, 2 and 3 as part of their impact, as well as what we're doing to the United Nations. So we'll look at a graphical version of Scope 1, 2 and 3. So we're talking about Scope 1, so this is your direct impact of your company. Scope 2, so this is where your power and that comes in. Now Scope 3, you've got your purchasing, so this is going to affect your purchasing coming upstream from your supply chain, and also all your deliveries and everything going out that way. So that's going to affect the supply chain down the other way. And this is where all your franchises and investments in that, or end of life, or the product stewardship, will affect business operations. That's why we're talking about the TVs, tyres, all that sort of stuff, to reduce the waste going into landfill, so then we can put that back through the system and making the economy more sustainable.